morning. Hi. Everyone hear me all right? I'm David Foster. I'm the chair of Safe Passage of the Board of Directors. I just want to thank everyone for being here, and special thanks to 9 North for doing the live stream of this. For May North, our musical entertainment with George and Chris over here. Can't hear you. Can't? How about now? Better? Sorry. We're going to get started here at about 8:15, so if you haven't, make sure you grab something from the buffet. Sit back, relax, but we'll get it all going here in a little bit. And thanks all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Sky is gray. Come on up to the house, and all you can see is all your life. Come on up to the house. All your crying ain't do no good. Come on up to the house. Come down from the cross, we could use the wood. Come on up to the house. You gotta come on up to the house. Come on up to the house. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. Come on up to the house. No light in the tunnel, no wine's in the fire. Come on up to the house. You're singing lead soprano in a junk band's choir. Come on up to the house. This life seems nasty, brutish and short. Come on up to the house. When the seas are stormy, you can't find no port. Come on up to the house. You gotta come on up to the house. Come on up to the house. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. Come on up to the house. Take it off. In this world that you can't do. Come on up to the house. No eternity inside of you. Come on up to the house. You're high on top of your mountain wall. Come on up to the house. You know you should surrender, you can't let go. Come on up to the house. You gotta come on up to the house. Come on up to the house. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. Come on up to the house. You gotta come on up to the house. Come on up to the house. This world is not my home, I'm just passing through. Come on up to the house. I don't remember when I lost my way. Guess it was the day I let this city make my bed. 'Cause I've been up and down the strangest set of circumstances, but you can always go on home. At least that's what my mama said. But even so, old man winter is bearing down. You better put your love on hold.
Check, check, check. Yep.
The last train whistle prepares the sound. Get in line. Get what you've been told. I still remember when you dug me out. You dragged me from the depths of where my spirit goes to hide. Sometimes everything I've gathered, every promise, every dollar only weighs me down, but at least you're by my side. Even so, old man winter is bearing down. You better put your love on hold. When the last train whistle prepares the sound, get in line. Get what you've been sold. I've been trying to feed this fire in my soul, but I don't know, 'cause I've been lying about what it is that I don't want, what I'm willing to settle for. But old man winter is bearing down. You better put your love on hold. When the last train whistle prepares the sound, get in line. Get what you've been told.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? All right? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to see all of you here in person, and those of you who are attending virtually. And we're just going to get going. I'm going to get into some thank yous and details later, but right now I want to introduce our speaker for today, Andrew Campbell, and just tell you that a couple of 3 years ago, I started getting emails from colleagues all around the country around the same time saying, hey, you have to check out this guy, Andrew Campbell, and so I did. And what I found was that, first of all, a kindred spirit in terms of using data to try to build a case for systemic change, and also his advocacy for people collaborating across different disciplines, among other things. But Andrew has really made himself into an expert on what's called family violence, which, as you will hear, is the interrelationship among, child maltreatment, domestic abuse, and animal abuse, or which, really basically means that if one person in a family is being hurt, there's probably everybody in the family is being hurt. So in carrying out this mission, he has developed some really unique ways to use data. He's become widely published, and that includes his new book, which is, I think, on the back of your program, Not Without My Pet. And in that book, he brings really a personal perspective to what life is like when you live in a violent family. And every year now, Andrew is invited to speak to thousands of people at dozens of events, both in the United States and internationally. And today, he's here with us. Andrew is also going to be with us tomorrow, although virtually, because we're going to host the first ever conference on family violence in Minnesota. And Andrew is going to give the keynote address there. And then we're going to have 5 breakout sessions with experts in various aspects of this discipline. So if you want a more in-depth introduction to Andrew's work, which is, really exciting stuff, you can still register for this event. It's easy. You just go to our website, and it's free, and it's virtual. You just click on the link. It's 9 o'clock till noon tomorrow. So with that, and without more details, I'm going to give you Andrew Campbell, who is a man, as you will see, of intense energy and clear purpose. And Andrew, we are so happy that you could join us for these 2 days.
We'll give it just a second and get the slides going, and then I will jump in here. Let's see here. All right, here we go. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. I speak often, but each and every time I treat it as if it were my last. And I put everything I've got into it. So I was speaking for 6 hours in Texas a couple weeks ago. I'll take 10 to 12 minutes with you today, and I'll use every bit of it. I just appreciate the opportunity. Yesterday I was actually speaking to professionals across Kansas from here in Minnesota virtually. 2 weeks ago I spoke virtually in Ukraine about how war and disaster can impact these issues. So I speak often, I write often. I wrote the book here recently. I'm writing my second now. I wrote an article for USA Today last year. A bunch of other articles too. But more than just the professional side, I have a very, very personal reasons for why I'm doing this work. I'm going to talk a little bit of, like I said, in a very short period of time, a little bit about the idea of family violence in my first slide, and then I'm going to talk more about why I'm doing what I do. It's certainly the hardest part of any of my speaking engagements. It's difficult to talk about some of the things I'll talk about today, but I think it's important. I think, if adults can't talk about what happened to them or what they saw or experienced as a child, when can we talk about it? Because it's certainly not often safe to do so when you are a child. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of these things with you today. Rich mentioned the idea of family violence, and it's definitely something I've learned to focus on. And when I talk about family violence, I'm talking about abuse, harm that occurs in the home. Thinking of child abuse, partner abuse, pet abuse, elder abuse. Obviously, abuse and violence is impactful and hurtful wherever it's happening, but it seems to be just so much more harmful when it's at the very place that you should feel safe, within the walls of your own home. I really have learned to view the 3 you see on the screen there as a team, that being adults, children, and pets in these homes. I honestly don't believe you can help any in these homes if you don't help all in these homes. Today I'm going to kind of, in the short period of time, focus on the concept of, or the idea of partner abuse. And even just thinking about it from that angle, when we think of partner abuse or domestic violence, since it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month here in the U.S., we think of the adult being the target. And that's often true. Now I'll say, particularly in the context of partner abuse, sometimes targets shift and change. Perpetrators of partner abuse, particularly if they think the adult victim is about to report or leave the home, they may then begin to actually target the children and pets. But even if not targeted, children and pets are certainly impacted by it. It's my belief that 100% of children who reside in homes where partner abuse occurs are harmed by it. I can't get to a place where I can imagine a child living in a home watching a caregiver be harmed and not affected. Even if they don't directly witness and see what happens, finding their parents in that condition after it is just so detrimental and harmful to their health. Again, a main focus of my work, this idea that everyone in the home is so interconnected, that the well-being of all 3 of these groups, again, you can't separate them out. You got to help them all if you want to help any of them. Particularly in the context of partner abuse, I really think there's just such a great importance on this particular bond. It's why it was the focus of my first book and why I speak on this issue often. When we think about the idea of partner abuse and we think about children in these homes, and they often are there, one of my studies noted that at least when domestic violence is reported to police, 59% of the homes have at least one child living in it. I'll also note that there's a different study, not by me, that found that 80% of homes where partner abuse occurs have at least one pet. So children and pet often in these homes. And I really think this bond is so critical. Again, put yourself in the mind of a child living in a home where you've got partner abuse, domestic violence occurring. Unlikely, probably, that the child is going to form a secure attachment to a perpetrator of abuse. A lot of reasons there why that's probably unlikely to happen. The other heartbreaking reality is when the other adult is being victimized and harmed, particularly by emotional abuse, emotional harm. It's not so much that that adult doesn't want to be there for that child. It just may be that they've had so much taken from them that they have little left. I think children often form very strong attachments and bonds to pets in these homes. I think protecting that relationship and really even just thinking about that relationship, whether it goes good or bad, really is a big key in looking at the outcomes in these homes, particularly for kids. So when the child-pet bond is protected, children can find life-saving support from these animals in these homes. When it's not protected, when there's animal cruelty, things like that, we can see things going in a very bad direction. Just thinking on the extreme end, even looking at serial killers, mass shooters, school shooters, we see often a high number of them with histories of engaging in acts of animal cruelty themselves in childhood. Jeffrey Dahmer that you see pictured there, I met the detective, or one of them involved with this case, have read through his whole confession. He often describes witnessing emotional abuse, domestic violence in his home. Doesn't necessarily ever describe being the direct target of it, right? But just talks about that harm of seeing the condition of his mother. Goes on to abuse animals, and then obviously we know the atrocious acts he committed against humans as well. It doesn't always go that way, but it does sometimes, and I think it's important to note that. Conversely, though, when the relationship is protected and children have a safe relationship with their animals, it truly is life-saving. The things I'll share about my own life, again, come from my own personal memories in youth and childhood. But I can remember at about 14 or 15, waking up, and I'm sorry, I talk about this often. I've given 150 talks, and every time it's hard. But I can remember at 14 or 15 waking up, my mom screaming, crying on the floor. I'm in my bedroom. I can still live that. I still have nightmares remembering it. My dad's standing there. His words to me were, "Take care of your sister." I had a younger sister. And then he forcefully stepped over my mom, I thought kind of in a threatening manner, walked out the door. Certainly wasn't the first event. I'd become aware over the last several years that preceded this of being able to hear things through my wall. And children often are much more aware than their caregivers realize of things. I was hearing it. I remember, at 12, you don't really know what domestic violence is or what that looks like, particularly, again, there was no physical or sexual abuse in my home. It was, quote unquote, just emotional abuse. I think we often fail to realize how harmful that is, though, and how it never lets up. A lot of times emotional abuse will go on to haunt victims for their entire life. But I was hearing things. I was thinking if it was my dad being mean to my mom, is how I kind of characterized it, belittling, putting down, just not good. I was beginning to get I felt sad for my mom, is what I would say. But then there was a moment, again, prior to the memory I just shared, where I remember it being worse. This time I got out of bed, I went and put my head against the wall, and this time I wasn't sad for my mom, I was scared for my mom. It sounded much worse, and I was actually scared for myself. I remember hearing the bedroom door open, I jumped in bed, covered myself up, because I could tell the person who had done that was coming to hear if I had seen it. So this moment at 14, 15, when I helped her up, there had been a lot leading up to it, but in that moment I said, hey, don't let him come back. We'll figure it out. Don't let him come back. I don't know what it's going to look like. It was me and my younger sister and my mom, but don't do it. Just don't let him back. Even at that age, before all the research and study, I could see what I was doing. I was worried about what it was doing to my sister. It was certainly affecting her as well. And so I will say a few years later, my mom let him come back for a short period of time, and that ended quickly again. I think it's important to note that, especially for victims of domestic violence, it often takes 7 tries to successfully end a relationship. Once perpetrators leave the home, it's not so much that the abuse and harm stops, as that it changes. We can often see more financial components and things like that, again, just trying to get back in the home. But I look back at that moment, and I certainly feel it was the right call, even though, again, the harm didn't stop. Again, things changed, and so over the next several years, and there's a picture of Shelby and I. Again, Shelby provided life-saving support for me. For the next several years, and even on into my 20s, I feared for my mom's safety. Again, no physical violence in our house, but I certainly had seen evidence, and I thought good reason to fear that my dad would come back and hurt my mom. He only ever talked about her with hate, with anger, every time we talked about her. So I would sit outside often throughout a lot of those years and just sit on the deck. I thought that if he was going to kill her, he would come to the back window where he could get to her room. And so that's where I'd sit. I'd sit out there at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And, this dog sat out there with me every night. I often say he never spoke a word, but he said everything I needed to hear when I needed to hear it most. Some nights he would lick tears from my eyes while I cried. Other nights he would just stand on the edge of the yard as if to say, I've got this, take a moment. I really can't put into words what that dog did for me. I often say I wish I could just go back one more time and thank him, because I knew he was helping me, but I never fully realized what was happening. As I got older, I would struggle with suicide. I know there was at least one time in particular where I thought my life was ending, that I thought things got really bad there, as they often do, I think, for kids in these homes. Again, not even being the direct target, you see these things, you get stuck in these things, it's really difficult. The depression, the darkness, everything. That dog was my one bright spot. I often say, he didn't just save my life once in a single moment, but every day and every single way. Every time I was close to suicide, when I thought I was just going to end it and just not be here anymore, I just reflected on him, his support, his love. He was always there. I certainly believe that he's the only reason I'm here right now. It's why I feel such passion for this work and for the other kids that are out there experiencing this type of harm in these homes. They matter, and we have to get to them. I believed, even with Shelby's steady, still voice, I believed that my life didn't matter. People would ask me, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I would always say, it doesn't matter. In my head, it was because I wouldn't be here to see it. I had no plan for what life would look like after I lost Shelby, and I certainly didn't believe that my life had any value. And again, I think it's a lie that many of the kids believe in these homes. Again, it's just so hard to see these things. Often you wish you were the target yourself, because it's harder to watch people you care about be harmed in that manner. Eventually, children, when they form these strong bonds, they do have to say goodbye. And it's hard. Whether it's in an act of animal cruelty that separates the child from their pet, or natural. For me, with Shelby, it was natural. He was 17. And this picture is hard. I just recently started looking. It took 10 years after I lost Shelby before I could look at a single picture of him. There was just so much emotion there. It just brings back, and I see that. When I look at that picture, I know how close. Like I said, I had no exit plan. When Shelby was gone, I was gone, and I see it in my eyes there. I know that I was very close again there to suicide. I was done, and that was about a year before I lost him. But again, as I said, I'm still here, and it's fortunately thanks to him. One of my escapes was taking walks with him. That's how I would get away. We would just go on long walks and be away from everyone else, and I felt normal in those moments. And I remember at 17 there, our last walk together, his legs literally just gave out. He literally was with me for as long as he physically could be, and I remember carrying him home and saying, it was like I carried him home that day, just as he had carried me for so long. Getting ready to wrap up here with a few final thoughts, but I know for many victims or child victims in these homes, it's terrifying to think about having your own family. Again, I thought I wasn't even going to be alive, but as I got older and started to think about these things, I met my wonderful wife, and she had a son. So I was immediately into having a son, and then I now have 3 children. But one of the things I suffered with is this idea I didn't want to have kids because I was afraid I would hurt them. I was afraid I would do the same thing that had been done to me. And I think that's often the case. I thought of this idea and it's not true, but I thought that you can't be a good dad if you don't have a blueprint for what that's supposed to look like. But what I realized as I began to think back, I actually did have a blueprint for what a healthy relationship looks like, and it was my relationship with my dog. For kids in these homes, they're learning normal, and they're learning normal to be violence, to be abuse, to be a harm. And they need someone to tell them that normal is not a healthy normal for them to be able to correct that. For me, it was Shelby. It was that relationship with him. I can't describe it accurately, what he's done for me. And just the joy with my own kids and with my own family now that I never thought possible. Again, a big reason of why I'm doing this work, because I remember what it felt like and I remember how it was. And I'm just fortunate and thankful that I get to be here before you today and talking about these things. I like to say as well, as I'm wrapping up here, Shelby helped me through the worst. But not only that, he certainly had a paw, or really 4 paws, in the good I have today. Again, I go back to that relationship with my dog, and it certainly was life-saving. I'm telling you, I would not be here if not for him. I really do appreciate the time and attention today and just the opportunity to speak with you about these things, for your interest in this area and all that you all do for the children here in this community and across your state. So again, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Okay, well, I'm going to go off script here for a second and just say that it was a little unfair to Andrew to try to get him to do what he often does in 6 hours in 10 or 12 minutes. And I just want to invite you again to tomorrow's event, especially the keynote speech, because he'll go into things like the fact that he's discovered new ways to pull data from census tracts and so forth and identify, among other things, he identified that if there's a report of animal abuse, within a year there will probably be a report of domestic violence as well in that same location, and that's kind of a sentinel where we can potentially get to children much sooner and do a better intervention. So that's just a hint of some of the things you would hear if you tune in tomorrow. So thank you, Andrew, for those insights into the complicated nature of family violence. So before I start, just a few thank yous are in order. I want to thank George McCorkle and Chris O'Brien, who came and provided the music at the last minute. They're right over there, and they did a nice job. It's kind of a last-minute thing that Stephanie arranged, and it really worked out. And I want to just start by recognizing David Foster, who is over here. He's served 5 years on the board and the past 2 as the chair of the board. And David has done some incredible things for Safe Passage, including a couple of fundraisers, one of which was a 50-mile walk. Now, I said 50 miles, not 50 kilometers. I don't think I know anybody who's ever walked that far for a fundraiser or anything else. And he's brought a lot of new supporters and donors to Safe Passage along with him. And best of all, he runs a really great meeting. So thank you, David, for everything you've done for Safe Passage. We really appreciate it. And also, I just want to thank Stephanie McCorkle, who's our operations manager and volunteer coordinator. Every year she does this event. Usually she does most of the work. This year she did all of the work. And, you do a great event. I really appreciate it. And also your great commitment to children in Minnesota, your faithful commitment over the years. So I also want to thank all of you for coming. It's so nice to see everybody live again. And next year, I think we might do an all live, no virtual version of this because it's so great to see everybody. And especially thanks to our table hosts because, without you, these programs would not be a success. And, we really appreciate it. And I just want to thank our board members, too. They're on the program, and they've donated their time and energy and passion to serving the children of Minnesota. Also, Patrick Clancy is in the back there. If you can give a wave. Patrick every year he generously donates his time to do the photography to memorialize this event. And I don't know if we have his approval, but we put his contact information on the back of the program. And then also want to acknowledge the good work of 9 North, the North Suburban Cable TV people in the back. Every year they help us get through the technology. That we couldn't do that without them. And also Marguerite von Durkheim and the catering team here. Every year they do just a great job, and we appreciate their work as well. So thanks to all of you. So let me begin my thoughts first by lifting up one part of our mission, which we don't often talk about, but it's to keep Minnesotans up to date on current child welfare issues, and we do that through a weekly blog, mostly weekly podcasts, and then we do bi-weekly webinars that feature interviews and presentations by leaders in the field. So if you haven't done so, please visit our website to find out how you can join us for these events. I also want to update you on the legislative part of our mission, which is, the more familiar to most of you. For the past 2 sessions, we've really done collaboration with like-minded organizations, and we were able to pass or advance several bills, all of them with bipartisan support, which, as I'm sure you know, in these times, just getting bipartisan support is an accomplishment in itself. So last year, we helped pass a bill, which we're still working on, that lowered some of the legal and regulatory barriers for relatives, for BIPOC families, for non-traditional families to become licensed as foster parents. But as part of that, we obtained an agreement that statewide standards would be developed for foster care recruitment and training. I think you'll see how important that is as I go along. And so that process is finally underway, and we expect we'll have some standards for that by next July. In this year's legislative session, we teamed up with a fellow nonprofit called Foster Advocates on 2 bills, which you may recognize from past years because we brought them forward in the past. The first was Maya's Law, and that passed, and it requires, first of all, that foster children be interviewed separately from foster parents, and you'll again see a little bit more why that's important in a minute. And also, for the first time, that child protection workers are going to be required to record in the computer system whatever they discover during a family assessment. It still needs some tuning up. There are a few loose ends there, but it's a big step forward. And then one thing, though, that didn't happen is that a provision was removed from the bill that we're still going to have to work on, which was that children in the child protection assessment process have to be interviewed separately from the adults. It seems self-evident to most people, but that's not how we do it now. However, we and our partner, Foster Advocates, reached an agreement with the Department of Human Services and representatives from counties to continue to work on that language until we get language that will require these interviews to be conducted separately in all but exceptional circumstances, which will help to define. And then this year, we nearly got a bill passed to place income that is meant for foster kids, we'll call them fosters, into trust accounts so that they'll have some resources when they age out of the system. Now, the current practice is to take income that goes to foster kids and divert it to the county coffers. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but basically the income that goes with foster kids is either survivor benefits from the death or disability of a parent, or benefits that they're entitled to because of their own disability. And we think this will help about 800 fosters a year. It was a major undertaking. Tons of people had to be involved. And unfortunately, even though this bill passed both the House and the Senate, which is usually the hard part, no bills that any budget impact were finally passed this year. They got stuck in that final step. But we expect that we're going to still have the bipartisan support and be able to complete the job next year. We also started a major non-legislative initiative this year, which is to analyze child fatalities from maltreatment from 2014 to this past June. And I just want to give a shout out. This was made possible by the support from Kathleen Blatz and Greg Page, and we're very grateful to them for their generosity in funding this. And also, we're doing this partnership with the Archbishop Ireland Justice Fellows Program at the School of Law here at University of St. Thomas. And our Ireland Justice Fellow is Maya Schulte, who's back there. Give a wave. There's Maya. And autographs after the show, right? Okay. And Maya has just doggedly and tenaciously dug up information on 88 child fatalities from media stories, from court records, and from fatality reports that she was able to get from the counties. Sometimes they cooperated. Usually they did. But we especially want to give a shout out to 4 counties that really made this job easier, and that was Hennepin, Olmsted, Dakota, and St. Louis. So thanks to those folks for helping with this. So then before the end of this year, we're going to release a report on our findings with lots of data for those who like to delve into the details. But even if you only read the executive summary and a case study or 2, I am confident that you will be stunned. You will be incredulous at the kinds of circumstances that we routinely leave children in this state. And I think you will conclude along with us that there is just minimal accountability for violent parents in this state, and that this just has to change. So let me share with you a preview of some results. Nearly 70% of the cases had prior child protection history, and that compares to roughly 50% nationally. And it raises the question of whether Minnesota doesn't respond to imminent threats of death to children with the same urgency as most states. Now, 2/3 of children were under 3 years old, And that includes over 40% who were infants, in other words, less than 1. Then, reflecting Andrew's remarks, 28% of cases had a history of domestic violence, including 7 children who were killed during a domestic assault. So again, that tells us that if child protection and domestic violence programs work together closely, they would be better able to protect both the child and the mother. And then finally, in addition, 1 in 10 children, this surprised even me, were in foster care, and all but 1 of them were in kinship foster care. So then that kind of demonstrates why we've been working so hard the past few years to try to get standards in the licensing area. So now I'd just like to put a face on some of these statistics. Let me start with the family history with child protection for an 8-year-old that I will call TD. And it goes back 15 years when his mother was one of 3 adults who held down and beat a child who was an older sibling of TD, resulting in several felony convictions. And since then, there's been at least 10 reports that were screened into child protection, which led to many findings, including sexual abuse by 3 different relatives. And TB's siblings ran away repeatedly to escape abuse. They reported, for example, that their mother would hold their hands down and hit it with a hammer. But they kept being returned home. Now, TD was examined twice by child maltreatment medical experts who found old wounds and still healing wounds, but he too continued to be returned to his mother until last winter. Then she forced him to stay in a garage overnight in sub-zero temperatures, and he froze to death. And despite all of this, the surviving siblings were left with the mother for another 1.5 years until finally they were removed because she was charged with the murder. It took 1.5 years to charge her for the murder. Now, I know that this is difficult for me to tell these stories. I'm sure it's difficult to listen to them, but it's the kind of thing that we have to face and deal with, I think, as the adults in the room, so to speak. There was another 8-year-old named A.H. who was isolated for 7 months by her father and stepmother. They used COVID as an excuse. And during that time, she was starved, she was beaten, she was tied with her hands behind her back and taped inside a sleeping bag, and she was put in confined spaces as long as a day at a time. Now, the mother had 50-50 custody, and so she pleaded with child protection to see the child, but they said she had no proof of maltreatment, even though that same county had just had a recent finding of severe physical abuse of her brother, and also the fact that isolating a child like this is a red flag for torture. Then there was local law enforcement. They were called to the house 31 times, but they never insisted on seeing the child, and that's even after neighbors gave them recordings of the girl screaming. And the mother also pleaded with the courts to help her enforce her custody agreement, but they didn't do that because of a technicality with her paperwork, and no one offered to help her correct it. So at the end, this little girl weighed 45 pounds, and she was finally beaten to death and strangled. So these stories, as hard as they are to hear, they illustrate patterns that we are seeing throughout all of this data on these 88 children. And they show 2 things, at least. First, most of these fatalities could have been prevented with just some simply timely intervention. And secondly, they demonstrate something that we have said repeatedly over these years, which is that the attitude of child protection has changed in the last 25 years. From one of gathering information and taking action if they found abuse, to one, and I think these cases illustrated, of actually trying to avoid finding out what happened and looking for every possible reason not to take action. Well, our mission at Safe Passage is to restore an appropriate balance between the interests of the parent and those of the child. And while this pendulum has begun to move back towards the interests of the child in Minnesota to some degree through the efforts of Safe Passage and just a couple of our close partners, we really have a long way to go. So it's critically important that we continue to have your support. In addition to the obvious, donation today, here are some things that you can do today to help. First, just watch for emails from us, especially during the state legislative session. And those emails will ask you to contact your legislators about bills that we're promoting or we're supporting. All you have to do is click on the link, and it sends a message to your own senator or state representative. And if you want, you can also add a personal note. Sending these emails alone will make a huge difference. And secondly, just sign up to volunteer as a child advocate with us. It's easy, and it's amazing the difference one person can make. Just check the box on the form that's going to be handed around, or you can just email Stephanie. It's just simple. It's stephanie@safepassageforchildren.org. It's probably on the program somewhere, and we'll be in touch with you soon. And also, COVID permitting, we will once again have an in-person day at the legislature in 2023. So I invite you to participate in this event. It's really energizing, and it's very effective. And finally, just help us spread the message by liking and following our social media channels. We're on Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. It's free and it's easy to do if you know how. And if you're like me and sometimes you don't, you can just contact Stephanie and she will walk you through it. So thank you all again for attending today and for your support. It means a great deal to us that you continue to encourage us in our work. And so here's David again with the details on what to do next.
Thanks, Rich. And Andrew, thank you for your remarks and your passion around this topic. And Rich, just thank you for your inspirational leadership to help children. And I think when I think about why to give to Safe Passage, right? And we can give different ways. We can volunteer. We can, and you'll see, you can give via QR code, check, credit card. All that's going to be in the package your table host hands out. But when I think about giving and supporting Safe Passage, I kind of think of it in three thoughts. First is just my own upbringing. My parents weren't wealthy, but they provided a home. They provided stability. They provided a place for me to do homework, the ability to graduate from high school, to go to college, and the foundation that I now have to, have my own career and have my own family and have a home of my own to raise children and 2 dogs. So it's they gave me that. And then I think about an 8-year-old girl who maybe she's at her 3rd school in the past year and a half. Maybe she doesn't know if she's going to get dinner tonight. Maybe she doesn't know if her parent is going to be upset and maybe prone to that violence. And that scared girl, I think of her and what it's like to be her, and she doesn't have that same opportunity, that chance that the rest of us may have had. And then third, I think of Safe Passage. I think of especially Rich, who, he could have said, "Hey, I'm gonna retire. I've worked. I've had a long career. Time to retire, and I've done my mission in this world." He didn't say that. He said, "You know what? I'm gonna start up a brand new organization, and it's not gonna be like a fun philanthropic organization, where we get together and it'll be really kind of these fun events. I hope this is fun, but a little dark on when Rich was talking there, but he's the voice for the people that don't have a voice of their own." And you think about some of the good that he's done, and I'm sure we can't quantify it, how many lives we've saved from Safe Passage, how many people's lives we improved. But if it's one, it matters a lot. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support. You'll see all the different ways to contribute in the packets. We have forms that you can fill out to volunteer, to write a check, to make a pledge. You can use your credit card at the desk. You can scan the QR code on those forms to make a donation mobily. And if there's any questions, ask your table host. But really, thank you for coming today.